poor girl walked away without a word. Until the millionaire CEO saw her name as the baby's emergency contact. They say some people walk out of your life so quietly you don't even hear the door close. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just walked away from the glass tower where her hope had been dismissed. And he barely looked up. To him, she was nobody, just another name on a forgotten resume. But 2 weeks later, in a hospital filled with the scent of antiseptic and quiet alarms, he would hold her baby in his arms and ask himself a question he'd never asked before. Why did a woman with nothing trust me with everything, the name he forgot? The elevator doors whispered shut behind her. Helena Morgan stepped into the cold marble lobby of Pinnacle Corporation and tightened her grip on the frayed strap of her canvas bag. Outside, Manhattan moved without apology. Honking horns, sharp heels, laughter that didn't belong to her. But inside her chest was a silence even louder. The kind that comes after you've heard the word no delivered with a polite smile and eyes that never really saw you. She had worn her best, an old button-down blouse that still smelled faintly of lavender from the laundromat, and shoes that had seen one too many seasons. But it hadn't mattered. To them, she was just another resume with a typo, another soft voice in a city full of louder ones. Helena didn't cry, didn't pause. She simply walked. The security guard didn't glance up. The receptionist was already answering another call. And on the 50th floor, behind a wall of glass that touched the clouds, Alexander Reed sipped his espresso and scanned through numbers that didn't lie. "Candidate Morgan," his assistant Diane said, setting down the folder he hadn't opened. "Too timid," he muttered without looking up. "We need someone who can run at the speed of war." "Of course, sir," Diane said, and Helena Morgan disappeared from their world. Quietly, without question. 2 weeks later, Alexander was rubbing his temple, the Manhattan skyline a blurred reflection in the glass. His phone buzzed, sharp, persistent. "I said no interruptions," he snapped as Diane appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice unusually tight. "But there's a call from Manhattan General Hospital. They said it's urgent. You've been listed as an emergency contact." Alexander blinked. "That's not possible," Amy insisted. He took the call. "Mr. Reed?" a woman's voice said, crisp but strained. "A 3-month-old infant named Lily Collins has been admitted with a high fever. We tried reaching the primary contact, Ms. Helena Morgan, but—" Alexander sat up straighter. "What did you say her name was?" "Helena Morgan. You're listed as the secondary emergency contact. We thought you'd want to know." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "There must be some mistake. I don't know any child. I don't even know her." But even as he said it, the memory flickered. Her eyes, downcast. The girl who had walked out without a sound. An hour later, Alexander's town car pulled up to the emergency entrance of Manhattan General. He had told himself it was a misunderstanding, or worse, a ploy for money. But standing in the pediatric ward, surrounded by cartoon murals and the low hum of machines, his world no longer felt so defined. A nurse led him to a small room with a glass window. Inside, a baby lay curled beneath a pale pink blanket, a tiny oxygen monitor wrapped around her foot, wires gently pulsing with each heartbeat. "She's stable," the doctor said quietly, "still running tests." Alexander swallowed. "There's been some confusion. I don't know why. I'm listed." "She had no one else," the doctor replied. "And her mother hasn't regained consciousness." Helena. The name sounded different here, softer, fragile. Not a resume, not a rejection. A person. Later that evening, the staff allowed him to visit the infant's room. The nurse, gentle and tired, smiled. "Would you like to hold her?" "I don't," Alexander began, but before he could finish, the tiny baby was in his arms. She blinked up at him, those impossibly blue eyes locking onto his face like she already knew him. Her hand, barely the size of his thumb, curled instinctively around his finger. He felt something then, something he couldn't name. A crack in the armor, a thread he hadn't noticed, pulling at him from the inside. And across the city, in a dim hospital room in Queens Memorial, Helena Morgan lay unconscious. Feverish, collapsed at the diner where she'd been working extra shifts. Just one more double, just one more paycheck. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, unaware that her baby was safe. Unaware that a man she had met only once now stood beside her daughter, asking questions he never thought he'd ask. Why had she listed him? Why not a friend, a neighbor, a pastor, anyone? Why a man who hadn't remembered her name? The next morning, Alexander stood in his glass office again. But this time, the city didn't look as sharp. He called his HR director. "I need an address," he said. The building in Queens was older than he expected. The walls smelled of boiled cabbage and dust. When he knocked, no one answered. "Looking for Helena?" a voice said from next door, an elderly woman with a faded sweater and sharp eyes. "Yeah, she's at Queen's Memorial. Collapsed. Poor thing. Works too hard." Alexander turned away quickly, but something about the woman's voice stuck with him. "Does she have family?" The neighbor shook her head. "None that I've ever seen." By the end of the day, Alexander had pulled every string he could. Helena Morgan was transferred to a private room at Manhattan General. Expenses? Covered. Pediatric care for Lily? Secured. He told himself it was obligation. That's what men like him understood. Obligation. Transaction. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about duty anymore. It was about the look in that baby's eyes, and the quiet courage of a girl who had trusted him. Not because he was good, but because he looked like someone who wouldn't let her child be alone. Chapter 1. The call he wasn't supposed to get. The morning had begun like any other at Pinnacle Corporation. The espresso machine hissed. The digital blinds slid open to reveal Manhattan glowing under a haze of cold sunlight. Alexander Reed's schedule, immaculately printed and paper-clipped, was already waiting on his desk, flanked by a black Mont Blanc pen and the day's market forecasts. Efficiency, discipline, control. These were the cornerstones of his empire, and Alexander Reed was not a man who tolerated deviation, not from the markets, not from his employees, and certainly not from the world he had carved into his own vision. So when his office phone rang, his direct line, not the receptionist's, he felt a flicker of irritation. Diane's voice came through, taut and hesitant. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Reed. There's a call from Manhattan General Hospital. They said it's urgent. You've been listed as an emergency contact." He froze. That was not a sentence that belonged in his day. Emergency contact? The phrase scraped against his instincts like a dull blade. "I don't have children," he snapped, "or dependents, and if this is some sort of scam—" "Helena Morgan," Diane cut in. "Helena Morgan." Silence. His mind ticked, sorting through names like data. Helena Morgan. 2 weeks ago, a soft-voiced girl in a worn-out blouse who had sat nervously across from him during the executive assistant interviews. She'd answered every question correctly, technically, but she lacked assertiveness, no spark, no edge. Pinnacle didn't run on sympathy. He'd pass on her within minutes. And now, "I'll take the call," he said. The hospital administrator's voice was calm, efficient, and unrelenting. A 3-month-old girl was admitted with a high fever. Name, Lily Collins. Her mother, Helena Morgan, is currently unresponsive. You are listed as the secondary emergency contact. There must be some mistake, Alexander replied flatly. I met the woman once, in a job interview. I understand, Mr. Reed, but she listed your name. You're the only one who answered. He stared at the wall of windows behind his desk. The city pulsed beneath him. Cars, people, ambitions on fast forward. Somewhere in that sprawl, a sick child lay alone, a mother unconscious. He could hang up, let the system deal with it. But something about the administrator's final words froze him in place. She listed you, Mr. Reed, even if she didn't think you'd pick up. He was in the hospital 35 minutes later. Manhattan General was a world apart from Pinnacle's glass sanctum. Here, the air smelled like disinfectant and desperation. The pediatric ward was painted with cartoon murals that did little to mask the sterile stillness of the space. A nurse in pink scrubs guided him down the hall. She stabilized, she said softly. We're monitoring her fever. But her mother, Helena, was transferred from Queen's Memorial with severe pneumonia. Her condition is still uncertain. And the baby? Alexander asked, his voice sharper than intended. The nurse paused at the door of a small private room and gestured toward the window. She's in there." He looked. A crib stood in the center of the room, dwarfed by machines and IV poles. Inside, a tiny girl lay asleep, her chest rising and falling beneath a fleece blanket with cartoon moons on it. A pulse oximeter blinked beside her. Her hand, no bigger than a plum, was wrapped around a stuffed lamb. "I'm not her father," Alexander said, as if the words could absolve him of the sudden ache forming in his chest. "We know," the nurse said gently. "But you're the only one who came." He didn't remember saying yes, only that a moment later the baby was in his arms. She was warm, too warm, but she didn't cry. She just blinked up at him, her face pink and puffy from fever, her fingers curling instinctively around the collar of his expensive suit. Something in him, cold and fortified for years, fractured. Alexander Reed, the man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions before breakfast, stood frozen by a child who weighed less than a laptop. And for once, he didn't have a strategy. He called Diane. "Get Helena Morgan's full file from HR, now. I need her emergency contacts, her address, any medical history she submitted, and call Queen's Memorial, find out her condition." "Yes, sir," Diane replied without hesitation. And then, "Are you okay?" He hung up without answering. Because no, he wasn't. And he didn't understand why. An hour later, he was at her apartment building in Queens. It was gray and narrow and tilted slightly, like it had been holding its breath for too long. Apartment 3B. No answer. An old woman opened the door across the hall, eyeing him with suspicion. "She's not home," the woman said, voice scratchy from years of cigarettes. "Collapsed at the diner where she works. They took her to the hospital last night. Poor girl." Alexander nodded once, tight-lipped, and left. That should have been the end of it. But as he stepped back into his car, he said quietly, "Take me to Queen's Memorial." The admitting nurse resisted until Alexander mentioned his name. Then things moved quickly. The doctor who greeted him looked exhausted. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from untreated pneumonia. Based on what little we know, she's been working double shifts while caring for her infant, likely skipping her own care to keep the baby fed. Can she be moved?" The doctor blinked. "That's not typical protocol, Mr. Reed. I'll cover all costs. Move her." A pause, then a nod. "I'll speak to my staff." As Alexander turned away, the doctor added, "She's been asking about her daughter. Thought you should know." Back at Manhattan General, he stood at Lily's bedside again. This time, when the nurse asked if he wanted to hold her, he didn't hesitate. "He has your eyes," he whispered softly, imagining Helena's face for the first time not as a line item on a rejection list, but as a person. A woman not much older than the interns he dismissed daily, trying to survive with no help and no margin for error. No one had come, except him, and only by accident. Still, here he was, holding a child who didn't belong to him, but who felt right. When Helena Morgan opened her eyes for the first time, Alexander was sitting in the chair beside her hospital bed. He looked up from the tablet in his hand and stood, straightening his suit. Her voice was barely audible. "My baby, she's here, at this hospital," he said gently. "She had a fever, but it's gone down. She's gonna be okay." Helena closed her eyes again, relief washing over her face. Then confusion. "Why are you here?" "I was listed as her emergency contact." Understanding dawned slowly, followed by horror. "I didn't think they'd actually call you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know who else." "Why me?" he interrupted, genuinely curious. "You don't know me. I didn't even hire you." She turned her face toward the window. "That's exactly why." He frowned. "I don't follow. I didn't want to put down nobody. It felt like giving up. And you? You looked like someone who could handle an emergency. Cold. Capable. I thought, if something ever happened, you'd at least know what to do." She smiled bitterly. "I never thought they'd actually call." Alexander stood silent for a long moment, watching the way her fingers trembled against the hospital sheet. "That was a hell of a risk," he said finally. Helena met his eyes. "Sometimes strangers are safer than the people who say they love you." Chapter 2. The Girl Who Had No One. Alexander didn't sleep that night. Instead, he stood by the pediatric ward window, arms folded, watching the quiet rise and fall of Lily's chest. Occasionally a nurse would peek in. No one questioned his presence. His tailored suit and furrowed brow made it clear this wasn't a man you disturbed. Except, he wasn't really there. Not in the way people usually were. He was somewhere else, someplace that looked like a childhood memory of being left at a school gate by parents too busy to wave goodbye. A place where the silence afterward stretched longer than it should have. He told himself it was ridiculous. This wasn't his child. This wasn't his problem. And yet, she had his name on the form. And her mother had trusted him. Not with her resume, not with a deal, but with something sacred. With her daughter. By morning, Helena had stabilized. Her pneumonia was still aggressive, but the antibiotics were working. Her fever had broken. She was sleeping deeply now, her face pale against the white sheets. Alexander stood at the end of her bed, watching the gentle motion of the oxygen tube beneath her nose. He couldn't reconcile the girl he'd dismissed 2 weeks ago with the woman who had worked herself into the ground for a child, his child, it seemed, for one strange night. Her hospital file was slim. No listed family, no emergency contacts other than him. Diane had confirmed it. No siblings, no close friends on her HR intake form. Just a small apartment in Queens and 3 part-time jobs on her resume. Coffee shop, diner, freelance data entry. All while raising a newborn. Didn't make sense. Not in the world he knew. People with that kind of pressure snapped, fell apart, asked for handouts or disappeared. But she hadn't done any of that. She'd shown up, quiet, determined, looking for a job she was never going to get, but still tried. That stubborn dignity stuck with him. A woman trying to keep her world from crumbling, even as it was already in pieces. That afternoon, Alexander made a decision that surprised even him. He returned to the hospital with a plan. When Helena finally woke again, eyes glassy, breath shallow, he was sitting beside her. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. "I should be a lot of places," he replied. "But I'm here." She turned her face away, clearly embarrassed. "I'm not a charity case, Mr. Reed." "I'm not offering charity," he said. "I'm offering a solution." She looked at him, wary. "I've arranged for you to be moved into a temporary executive apartment. 2 bedrooms, safe, clean, quiet. I can't afford. It's already covered. The company owns it. It's empty. I'm not taking a handout." "It's not a handout," he said smoothly. "It's a job. You still need one, don't you?" Her brow furrowed. "You said I wasn't assertive enough." "I was wrong." Helena blinked. "Why are you really doing this?" Alexander hesitated. That was a fair question. And he didn't have an easy answer. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the image of Lily's hand curled around his tie. Or the way Helena's eyes had fluttered in panic when she woke, asking about her baby before anything else. Or maybe it was something he couldn't name. "You trusted me," he said at last. "When you had no one else. That matters." Later that day, the hospital staff helped move Helena and Lily into the apartment Alexander had arranged in Murray Hill. She protested, quietly, but firmly. He ignored her objections with polite efficiency. The apartment was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows, 2 bedrooms, and a refrigerator already stocked with essentials. A bassinet had been set up beside the queen-sized bed. Diapers, bottles, a stack of soft blankets folded neatly on a leather armchair. Helena paused at the door, Lily cradled in her arms, her expression unreadable. "You did all this?" "I delegated," Alexander said. "My assistant has taste." Helena walked through the apartment slowly, as if afraid to touch anything. Her body still ached. Her steps were slow, but her eyes missed nothing. She stopped in the smaller bedroom, where the crib sat beside a dresser already stocked with baby clothes. "You could have walked away," she said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Alexander didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched her hold Lily close, her face pressed to her daughter's hair, and thought, because someone had to stay. Over the next few days, Helena barely left the apartment. She slept in short stretches, waking often to check on Lily. Her cough lingered. Her strength returned in inches, not miles, but she never complained, never asked for more than what was given. She simply endured. Alexander visited often. At first, it was under the guise of professionalism, checking on her progress, outlining expectations for her new position as his executive assistant once she recovered. But as the days passed, their conversations drifted. They talked about her classes. She'd earned a business degree online between shifts. About her mother, who'd died young. Her father, who had vanished years before that. About dreams she once had of working in finance, maybe consulting. But doors stayed closed for girls without names, without pedigree. And then Lily had happened. "I thought I'd lost everything," Helena said one night, her voice hoarse as she poured herself tea. "But she made me want to keep trying." Alexander watched her carefully. "And you never told the father?" Her jaw tightened. "I did, at first. He didn't react well." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. But he took note of the shift in her eyes, the fear beneath the surface, the way she locked the apartment door every night, even though there was a doorman downstairs. The real turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Alexander had left a few folders on the dining table, a quarterly report, a struggling Pacific Division breakdown, and a list of potential acquisition targets. He returned the next day to find them annotated in blue ink. Helena sat on the couch, Lily asleep in a wrap on her chest, a legal pad in her lap. "I hope you don't mind," she said, looking up. "I got bored. You read my Q3 analysis? You siloed the Pacific R&D from the core leadership. They're innovating, but no one's listening. You're wasting talent." Alexander stared at her. No one in his executive team had pointed that out. "You read the report and understood all that?" She shrugged. "Like I said, I got bored." That night, after he left the apartment, he sat in his car longer than usual. Rain blurred the windshield. The city buzzed beyond the glass. And he thought about the girl who had walked out of his office 2 weeks ago and had somehow walked right back into his life. Not loud, not demanding, just quietly, completely. Chapter 3. The Baby with Her Eyes. The first time Alexander Reed saw his own reflection in Lily's eyes, it startled him. She was lying on the plush playmat Helena had set up by the living room window, cheeks flushed, eyes wide and unblinking. He'd only bent down to pick up a folder, but her tiny gaze locked onto him with unnerving clarity. No fear, no recognition, just curiosity and something else. Something that felt like trust. He froze. Then, without meaning to, he smiled. It was small, uncertain, but real. The first one in a long time that didn't feel rehearsed. Helena noticed. "She watches you like she knows your soul," she said from the kitchen, her voice still scratchy from healing lungs. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat on the edge of the armchair, her movements slower these days. Measured, maternal. "She's 3 months old," Alexander said, almost defensively. "She doesn't know anything yet." "She knows more than you think." He looked down again. Lily blinked once, then reached for his tie with a soft, gummy hand. He didn't pull away. That night, after Helena tucked Lily into the crib, Alexander lingered in the doorway. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For everything. The hospital, the apartment, the formula, the diapers, even the crib that plays Beethoven." "It's pinnacle issue," he replied dryly. "All the latest executive perks." She laughed. The sound was gentle, airy, like wind in late autumn. It was the first time he'd heard it. "I'll pay you back," she added, serious now. "Every cent." Alexander shook his head. "I'm not keeping score." "You're a CEO. You always keep score." His lips twitched. He didn't argue. Days passed, then a week, then 2. The lines between roles began to blur. He still ran Pinnacle, still hosted board meetings, closed international deals, gave speeches in perfectly pressed suits. But his phone now held photos of a baby girl with sleepy eyes and a shock of dark hair. His driver waited longer in the mornings, because he often stopped by the apartment before work. Not to check on Helena, but because Lily cooed when she saw him. and because her tiny hands felt like gravity. One afternoon, while Helena was resting in the other room, Lily began to fuss. Alexander, alone, unqualified, and mildly terrified, lifted her into his arms and swayed awkwardly in the living room. The baby settled within seconds, cheek pressed against his shoulder. He glanced down and saw their reflection in the window. It didn't look wrong. In fact, it looked right. The thought unsettled him. Later that week, he found Helena in the kitchen, standing barefoot on the tile, her hair tied up in a loose bun, humming softly as she wiped down the counter. The smell of something warm lingered, cinnamon maybe, or clove. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You used to dream of finance," he said. She looked up, startled. "Do you remember that?" "I don't forget useful people." A small smile touched her lips. "Finance was a long time ago," she said, "before all this. All this being, life. Lily, being dismissed in 12-minute interviews." He winced slightly. "Fair." Helena stepped closer, her eyes serious. "Why did you offer me the job, really?" Alexander paused, then answered truthfully. "Because you read my reports and understood them. Because you see patterns people with degrees don't. Because you challenge me without trying to impress me. And maybe because I wanted to see you walk into the building one day, not walk out." Helena looked away. "That's a dangerous thing to say. Because it sounds like something a man says when he wants something in return." Alexander met her gaze without flinching. "I don't want anything," he said softly, "except for you to stop apologizing for being remarkable." But the world didn't stay quiet forever. Trouble came, as it always did, with flash photography and cold headlines. A photo surfaced. Alexander Reed exiting the Murray Hill apartment, Lily in his arms, her blanket trailing like a banner. The tabloids didn't hesitate. Fortune 500 CEO's secret baby? Who is the woman behind the crib? Mystery girl and Manhattan's most eligible billionaire. The headlines didn't matter, but the whispers inside Pinnacle's boardroom did. That afternoon, Alexander stormed out of a crisis PR meeting and took the elevator straight to Helena's apartment. He found her on the couch, pale, trembling, her phone clenched in her hand. "They found us," she whispered. "He found us." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Who?" "Lily's father." The words dropped like ice into the room. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. Not because of the scandal, not because of the press, but because the name she finally spoke, James Harrington, was one he'd been waiting to destroy for 15 years. And now, the girl he hadn't remembered from a 2-week-old interview was the one person who could bring him face to face with the man who had broken his family. Chapter 4. You Don't Owe Me Anything. Helena didn't sleep after the headlines dropped. She lay awake on the couch, the blue glow of her phone screen burning through the darkness. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Lily's soft breathing came from the next room, steady but distant, like the sound of waves breaking on a shore she could no longer reach. Alexander had offered safety, he had offered space, but he hadn't offered silence. And now the world knew. Not her name, not yet, but they knew enough. And somewhere out there so did James Harrington. She remembered the moment she knew she had to run. She was 7 months pregnant, standing in a luxury condo that didn't feel like hers, with James pacing in front of the fireplace, his voice sharp and low. "I've already told the board we're engaged," he said. "It's time you stopped hiding." Helena had flinched. "You never ask me." "I don't need to ask, you're carrying my child." The words had dropped like stones. That night she packed a single duffel, took her laptop and ultrasound photos and vanished before dawn. She changed her number, deleted her social media, moved into a basement apartment in Queens and started over. Quietly, without permission. And now, 3 months into Lily's life, it was all unraveling. Because she'd dared to trust a stranger. Alexander arrived at the apartment before sunrise. The headlines were still trending. Billionaire's mystery baby was now the top story across 3 business tabloids, accompanied by blurry zoom lens photos of Lily in his arms. He expected anger, accusation, but Helena met him at the door with something worse, quiet resignation. "I'm leaving," she said. "No, Her jaw tightened. "Alexander, I've brought chaos into your life, into your company. You don't need this." He stepped past her into the apartment. The light was dim. A bottle sat unwashed in the sink. Her duffel was already packed, sitting by the door. "Where will you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere James can't find me." "Already has." She flinched. Alexander sat down on the couch, rested his elbows on his knees, and looked at her. Not like a CEO, not like a man used to control, but like someone who had just realized how fragile everything had become. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "I know. You don't have to stay because I helped you. I know. But don't leave because you're afraid." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her hands, calloused from dish soap, from waitressing, from holding a life together with duct tape and prayers. "I'm tired of being someone's liability," she whispered. "I've always been someone's mistake." Alexander stood and crossed the room slowly. "You're not a mistake, Helena. You're the only honest thing I've known in years." She looked up, startled. "Why?" "Because you walked into my office with nothing and still managed to leave a mark. Because you named me on a form and didn't ask me for a thing. Because Lily has your eyes." He closed her own, tears slipping free. He stepped closer. "Stay. We'll fight this together." Later that day, Alexander held a press conference. Not to deny the rumors, not to exploit them, but to own the narrative. "There is no secret child," he said calmly to the sea of reporters. "There is a child and a mother. Both deserve privacy and compassion." He didn't mention Helena by name, but when he returned to the apartment that night, she was still there, waiting. Over the next few days, a fragile rhythm returned. Helena resumed caring for Lily. She no longer slept on the couch, but returned to the bedroom, though she still locked the door at night. Alexander visited more often. Not always with briefcases or reports. Sometimes just with soup, or a new set of pacifiers, or books on parenting he hadn't yet opened. Once, Helena caught him asleep on the couch, Lily curled on his chest, her tiny fingers tangled in his tie. It undid something inside her, but peace was temporary, because James Harrington never lost. It started with a message. A known number. "Found you." Helena dropped her phone. That night, she barely ate. Didn't speak. Just paced the apartment in her socks, pausing only to peek into Lily's crib to make sure she was still breathing. Alexander noticed, of course. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "Nothing important." But when his security team called to report an unauthorized man attempting to access the building, claiming to be Lily's father, she couldn't lie anymore. "He's going to take her," she whispered. "He'll go to court. He has power. Money. His family owns half the judges in this city." Alexander was silent for a long moment. Then he said something she would never forget. "Then we don't fight him his way." The next morning, Alexander made 2 calls. One to his legal team, and one to his past. Helena had no idea what he was planning, only that he walked into her kitchen at noon, opened the fridge, and said, "I need you to trust me. You've already done more than anyone ever has. Then let me finish it." James Harrington returned 2 days later, this time with lawyers and his father, and a court order signed by a judge well known for his Harrington ties. They demanded a DNA test, emergency custody. They claimed Helena was unstable, living off a CEO's pity. They came for blood. Alexander was waiting, not with rage, with evidence, with recordings, with leverage, and, most devastatingly, with truth. By the time it was over, James's face was pale, his voice cracked, and his father was threatening to cut him off publicly. Alexander stood at the head of the conference table, Helena beside him, holding Lily tight. "You'll leave her alone," Alexander said flatly, "or I'll destroy you." Not in court, in public. James tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore, especially not Theodore Harrington. "Sign it," Theodore told his son, pushing the settlement papers forward. "Before you lose what little you have left." James sighed. It was over. Back at the apartment, Helena sat on the couch, Lily sleeping against her chest. Alexander knelt beside them. You're safe now." Helena nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't want to be your burden," she whispered. "I wanted to protect you." "You're not my burden," he said. "You're the reason I remembered who I am." "Who are you?" He took her hand, his voice quiet. "Someone who used to think power meant winning, now I know it means protecting." Chapter 5. The CEO's apartment and a crib. Helena had never been in a space that felt so empty and full at the same time. The CEO's apartment was nothing like her old studio in Queens. No peeling paint, no creaking pipes, no neighbors yelling through the walls. Everything here was polished, minimalist, expensive. The kind of place you tiptoe through, even when you've been invited in. She stood in the entryway, holding Lily, too tired to marvel and too wary to relax. Alexander set her duffel down by the hallway, then stepped back as if to give her room to breathe. "This is temporary," he said quietly, "until you're fully recovered, until the press dies down, and until we figure out what comes next." Helena nodded, though her chest tightened. Temporary, that word again. It always made her feel like a guest in her own life. She shifted Lily in her arms and stepped further inside. The apartment wrapped around her like a world she didn't belong to. The floors were dark wood, the furniture soft gray leather. Glass walls framed the city skyline like art. In the corner of the master bedroom, someone had set up a white crib, not one of those cheap folding travel ones, but a real crib, solid oak, painted with tiny stars. A mobile hung from the top, spinning gently. Helena stared at it. There were diapers stacked in the drawers, a bottle warmer plugged in near the wall, a bin full of rattles and soft toys. Even the gentle hum of a white noise machine. She turned slowly. "You did all this?" Alexander, standing in the doorway, shook his head. "DM, she said babies like stars and music." He thought of everything. He nodded, then paused. "I asked her to." Later that night, after Helena had given Lily a sponge bath and changed into one of the oversized shirts she'd brought in her duffel, she wandered into the living room to find Alexander seated on the couch, barefoot, sleeves rolled up. He looked hurt, tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from work, but from caring about something that wasn't his problem. She stood by the edge of the sofa. "You don't have to do all this." He looked up. "I know." "Then why are you?" There was a long pause. Then he said, "Because the first time I held Lily, she looked at me like I mattered, like I wasn't just another man with money and a corner office. And because when I see her eyes, I see yours." Helena sank onto the opposite end of the couch, silent. "That scares me," she admitted. He turned to her. "Why?" "Because it makes me want to believe it's real." Over the next few weeks, the apartment softened. Not the furniture, not the view, but the air between them. Helena started leaving her coffee mug on the kitchen counter. She started folding tiny laundry on the balcony, her laughter echoing softly as Lily gurgled in her bassinet. She started calling Alexander by his first name without apologizing. And Alexander changed too. He started skipping morning meetings to check on Lily's fever. He started keeping pacifiers in his briefcase and lullabies in his playlists. He started coming home early, not because of obligation, but because the sound of Lily's laugh had become addictive. They didn't talk about what they were, but they moved through the same space like people learning the steps to a dance neither of them knew they already loved. One evening, a storm rolled over Manhattan. Rain slapped against the glass. Helena stood by the window in bare feet, watching the lights blur across the skyline. Alexander entered quietly behind her. "Did you always want to be a mother?" he asked. She exhaled. "No, but I knew." Once, I felt her kick for the first time, that I couldn't walk away, even when I was terrified, even when I had no one. "You had me. I didn't know I did." He stepped closer. "You do now?" Helena turned to face him, her voice a whisper. "And what do you have?" He looked at her, then past her, at the crib in the corner, at the soft glow of Lily's nightlight, at the girl standing barefoot in his penthouse, with a baby on her hip and a heart still guarded. "I have a reason," he said. "For the first time in years, I have a reason." That night, after Helena tucked Lily in and checked the locks twice, she walked into the kitchen and found a note taped to the fridge. "You don't owe me anything, but if you ever want something more, I'll be here. A." She read it once, then again. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her journal. Between a page titled, "Things I Thought I'd Lost" and "Things I Might Still Find." Chapter 6. The day she read his reports. It started with boredom, the kind that only comes when your body is healing faster than your life. Helena had just finished folding Lily's laundry, tiny socks, bibs, onesies, soft from too many washes, and now Lily was napping, her chest rising and falling to the rhythm of the rain outside. The apartment was still, its silence punctuated only by the quiet hum of the dishwasher and the occasional creak of floorboards as the wind rattled the glass walls. Helena wandered into the living room and noticed a stack of folders on the kitchen island, thick, clean, and marked with the embossed silver logo of Pinnacle Corporation. She hesitated and opened one. The pages weren't gossip or spreadsheets. They were puzzles, quarterly performance summaries, R&D funding allocations, project silos that weren't connecting. Helena had studied this stuff in school, but never in practice. She'd written reports on companies like Pinnacle. She'd dreamed of presenting in rooms like those conference tables. She'd just never had a door that opened far enough to let her in. But these documents, these problems, felt solvable. So she started scribbling notes in the margins, then made a second pot of coffee, then brought out a yellow legal pad she hadn't touched since before Lily was born. By the time Alexander returned that evening, Helena had rearranged 3 internal structures, flagged 2 overlooked innovations, and, accidentally, solved a 6-month logjam in the company's Pacific division. He stepped inside, umbrella dripping at the door, and froze when he saw her at the table. Hair up, sleeves rolled, lips pursed in focus as she flipped pages, scribbled something, then reached for another report like it was a novel she couldn't put down. "I didn't mean to snoop," she said, not looking up. "Doesn't look like snooping," he said, slipping out of his coat. "Looks like a hostile takeover." Helena finally looked at him, pen still in hand. "You're wasting innovation talent in your Southeast R&D branch," she said. "Their work isn't getting visibility. It's trapped under too many layers of regional approvals." Alexander walked over, picked up the file she was referencing, and scanned her notes in the margin. Clear, logical, brutally efficient. He looked up. "My analysts didn't catch that. They said they don't read the footnotes." "And you do?" She smiled, shy but unflinching. "I read everything." That night, they sat at the kitchen table long after Lily had fallen asleep. Not as boss and assistant, not even as man and woman, but as 2 people speaking the same language for the first time. Helena had thoughts on workflow, on managerial blind spots, on overlooked patterns in employee attrition across Asian markets. Her mind worked like a chessboard, strategic, layered, precise. Alexander watched her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not who I thought you were," he said. "And who did you think I was?" Another quiet voice I wouldn't remember. Helena looked away. "I was," she said softly, "until I had to be louder for her." It became their new routine. Every few nights, Alexander would forget a file on the table. The next evening, it would be returned, annotated, color-coded, often with a sticky note that read, "This sentence says a lot and nothing at once. Rewrite it." He started asking her opinion, genuinely. At first, she was hesitant, careful. Then one night, over takeout cartons and baby monitors, he handed her a tablet and said, "You should present this next quarter." Helena laughed. "I'm not even officially on payroll yet. I'll fix that. I don't belong in a boardroom." "Why not?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Because I'm a single mom in borrowed clothes, living in an apartment I don't pay for, barely holding it all together." Alexander leaned in, his voice steady. "You belong in any room you walk into, Helena, with or without me." A few days later, they were sitting on the rooftop garden of the building. Lily was in a stroller beside them, snoring softly under a blanket with sheep on it. The city hummed far below. Helena leaned her head back against the lounge chair and sighed. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if I hadn't gotten pregnant. Alexander glanced at her. Do you regret it? She turned to him, eyes clear. Never. We were speaking of nothing really before. This is not legal. If you have any issues with illicit drive, I do not recommend it. I promise you that. No fists. But, I'm gonna be at the concert. Or, if I am, please. He nodded slowly. My mother said something once, that having a child doesn't make you weaker, it makes you ruthless about what matters. Helena smiled faintly. Then I must be terrifying. Alexander looked at her, long and quiet. The wind brushed her hair across her cheek. She didn't move to fix it, and he didn't either, just watched it, soft against her skin. You are, he said finally, terrifyingly brilliant. One night, after a long day of meetings, Alexander came home late. He found Helena asleep on the couch, Lily curled on her chest. Her arm had fallen over a folder with the Pinnacle logo. He didn't wake her. He just sat on the edge of the coffee table, watching the rise and fall of her breath. In the dim light, her face looked younger, unarmored, as if the woman who'd once walked out of his office feeling invisible was finally starting to believe she wasn't. And maybe wasn't afraid to be seen anymore. He reached for the folder, half curious, and saw her latest notes scrawled in the margins. At the bottom of the page, a line, not for him, not for the company, but maybe for herself. Sometimes the door doesn't open for you, so you make a new door. He folded the page gently and set it aside, then reached down, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and whispered something he hadn't said aloud in years. Please stay. Chapter 7. The photo that broke everything. It wasn't a professional shot. Just a blurry image taken from across the street by someone with a long lens and nothing better to do. In the photo, Alexander Reed stood outside the Murray Hill apartment building. The spring sun fell low behind him. His suit jacket was open, and in his arms, tucked close to his chest, was Lily. The blanket slipped slightly, revealing her chubby cheek. Her fingers curled around the collar of his shirt. She looked like she belonged there, and the internet noticed. The first article appeared quietly. Manhattan CEO seen cradling infant, is there a secret family? Then came the speculation, rumors, theories. By morning, the story had hit 3 major news platforms. Twitter exploded. Instagram sleuths found Helena's job history via archived job listings. Reddit threads pieced together the timeline from her hospital stay to her supposed live-in status. By noon, the words CEO's hidden baby were trending. Alexander's phone rang non-stop. His board demanded explanations. His legal team warned of liability optics. His ex-wife left a voicemail with clipped sarcasm. Glad to see you've moved on, to someone with a stroller. He ignored them all. But when Diane walked into his office with a tablet in hand and a pained look on her face, he knew it was worse than he thought. She's being doxxed, Diane said softly. Photos of Helena, her apartment, even Lily's birth certificate. Someone leaked it. Alexander stood so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. Get my driver, now. Helena had seen it. Of course she had. She sat on the edge of the bed, Lily in her arms, the tablet still open beside her. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled. The article used her full name, and James had texted her. Just 3 words. Now everyone knows. Her stomach twisted. She had tried so hard to stay invisible, to keep Lily's life untouched by the mistakes and violence of her past. She had kept everything small, controlled, until she trusted him. And now the world knew. When Alexander arrived, the first thing she said wasn't hello. It was, I'm leaving. He stepped into the bedroom, drenched from the rain outside, his coat dripping onto the hardwood. Oh, this isn't a negotiation, Alexander. He walked closer. So don't negotiate, just tell me why. Helena stood. Because they know where I live. Because James is watching. Because I was foolish enough to think I could build something safe with someone like you. He flinched. Someone like me? She shook her head. You're a headline. I'm a scandal. And Lily deserves better than to grow up Googling her baby photos under a tabloid title. Alexander was quiet for a long time. Then he said, you think I regret this? I think you don't understand what it costs me. That night she packed. Again, not in a panic this time, but in silence. There was something even more heartbreaking in that quiet. The way she folded Lily's clothes with gentle hands. The way she placed her coffee mug in the sink, as if it never belonged to her. When Alexander walked into the living room and saw the duffel by the door, his chest burned. "Helena," he said. She turned, already bracing herself. "Don't care what the world thinks," he said softly, "but I care that you don't trust me to stand beside you." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "I trust you," she whispered. "That's why this hurts." Then came the knock. Sharp, official. Alexander opened the door to his head of security, stone-faced. "We have a problem. James Harrington is in the lobby again, this time with legal counsel. He's claiming paternity rights." Helena staggered back, clutching Lily. "That's impossible." "Apparently," the guard said carefully, "they've secured an emergency court order for a DNA test, signed by Judge Keller." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Keller's bot." "I know." Helena's voice shook. "What do we do?" Alexander turned to her, every inch of the CEO back in place. "We stall." He descended into the lobby like a man ready for war. James Harrington was waiting. Sharp suit, cold smirk, lawyer at his side. His father, Theodore, stood behind him. Silver hair slicked, expression bored. "We're here for the child," James said, already smug. "She's not a possession," Alexander replied calmly. "And you're not on the birth certificate." The lawyer stepped forward. "Your opinion is irrelevant. This court order allows for an immediate test. I'll have my legal team review it. Delay it and you'll face obstruction." Alexander didn't flinch. "Try me." Back upstairs, Helena rocked Lily, her heart pounding. "He'll take her," she whispered. "He'll find a way." Alexander returned 10 minutes later, face unreadable. "We need leverage," he said. "I don't have any." "I do." He made one phone call. To a man who had once lost everything because of the Harringtons. To a man named Richard Morgan. Helena's grandfather, Chapter 8, the man who wanted ownership. He didn't come with flowers. He came with lawyers and threats disguised as rights. James Harrington stood in the private conference room at Pinnacle's headquarters like he already owned it, arms folded, chin lifted, with the smug confidence of a man born into legacy and taught that fear is a currency. Alexander stood at the other end of the table, still as stone. Helena sat between them, Lily in her arms, barely breathing. "You can't buy your way out of this one," James sneered. "We're not just talking family now, Reed. This is blood." "You abandoned her," Helena said, her voice shaking but sharp. "You left when I told you I was pregnant. You called her a mistake." "Allegedly," the lawyer added, adjusting his cuffs. "You have no proof of that." "I have recordings," Alexander said. James turned, startled. "You what?" "I make it my business to record threats, especially ones made to a mother in fear." He tapped his smartwatch. "This room is recording now, too." The elder Harrington, Theodore, looked up for the first time. His face had the carved permanence of money. An old man built from scandal-proof stone. "You're bluffing," James said. "Am I?" Alexander countered. "Because if I'm not, what you just said about the child being yours and your intention to remove her from her mother might be enough to bury you in every family court in this state." James stepped forward, hand twitching into a fist. "You think this scares me? I'll get custody. I'll take her, and there's not a thing your reputation or your pathetic hero complex can do to stop me." Alexander leaned in slowly, his voice cool and final. "She's not property, and you're not entitled to what you walked away from." Outside the room, security kept watch. Helena rocked Lily, heart pounding, memories of that final night with James pulsing behind her eyes. The rage. The way he'd said, "I'll make the decisions from now on. You don't get to think." She'd never told anyone how long it had taken to get that voice out of her head. Then the door opened. Alexander stepped out, looking as calm as ever. But when he knelt beside Helena, his eyes softened. "He's going to push," he said. He has influence. He has resources. But we have something he doesn't. Helena's throat tightened. What? Truth? Later that evening, Alexander made one final call. And the next morning, Richard Morgan, Helena's estranged grandfather, walked through the doors of Pinnacle's 60th floor boardroom. He looked older than the photos Helena barely remembered. His suit was modest, hands weathered from time and distance. But when he turned to her, his voice cracked gently. "Hello, Helena," he said. "I've waited 25 years to say that." The confrontation was held behind closed doors. James was furious. His father was stunned. The lawyer paled. Richard Morgan laid down files, handwritten notes, financial records, a manuscript for a memoir never published, all of it documenting how the Harringtons orchestrated the collapse of Morgan Financial, how they pushed a good man to ruin and erased the next generation along with his legacy. "You take this child from her mother," Richard said calmly, "and the world sees exactly what your family did to mine. We'll print every page. We'll bring it to court, to shareholders, to the press." Theodore folded his hands. "This would destroy both our names." "No," Alexander said, "just yours." The legal agreement was signed an hour later. James relinquished all parental claims to Lily. No DNA test, no custody, no contact. The Harringtons walked out silent. And Helena broke. Not with tears, but with a slow breath that felt like the first she'd taken in years. She looked at Alexander, Lily sleeping against her chest, and whispered, "Why did you fight so hard?" He looked at them both. "Because some people chase legacies," he said, "but I found mine asleep on a baby monitor." That night, back at the apartment, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Helena placed Lily in the crib. Alexander stood behind her, arms crossed loosely, quiet. "She's safe," Helena whispered. "She's yours," he said. She turned to him slowly. "What about us?" Alexander hesitated. "I don't know what we are," he admitted, "but I know I don't want this to end here." Helena stepped closer. "Me either." And in the silence that followed, for the first time, she leaned into him. Not because she needed rescue, not because he was powerful, but because she wanted to. Chapter 9. The grandfather she never knew. Helena didn't know how to stand in the same room as someone who had waited a lifetime for her. Richard Morgan sat across from her in Alexander's penthouse, a warm cup of tea trembling slightly in his aging hands. He wore a gray cardigan and old leather shoes that creaked when he walked. Nothing like the corporate wolves she'd come to fear. He didn't command attention the way Alexander did. He simply existed. Quietly. Regretfully. Lily was asleep in the next room. Alexander had stepped out to give them space. The silence stretched. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to say this," he said, "but I want you to know, I never stopped looking." Helena looked down at the mug in her hand. "My mother never spoke about you." "I know," he said softly. "After the collapse, she changed her name, moved away. I respected her choice. I figured if she needed to protect you from my past, she had her reasons." "She did." Richard nodded, accepting the weight of that truth. "She was right too," Helena added. "Back then, I wouldn't have wanted to carry your name either." Her words weren't cruel, just honest. But they still cut. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded photo, faded and soft around the edges. It was her mother. Younger. Smiling in a way Helena had never seen. Standing outside a beach house, wind in her hair. "I used to carry this in my wallet," Richard said. "Everywhere." Helena blinked fast. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he continued. "Not forgiveness, not a relationship. I just wanted to see you, to say her name out loud again." Helena stared at the photo, then back at the man who held it like a rosary. "I don't know what to do with you," she whispered. Richard gave a sad smile. "You don't have to do anything. Just know that you're not alone in the world. Not anymore." The next morning, Helena stood on the balcony with Lily in her arms. The city moved around them. Buses below, planes above, wind curling through the metal bones of buildings. But up here, things felt still. Alexander joined her, coffee in hand. "You stayed," he said. I didn't plan to. He looked at her. What changed? She smiled faintly. You didn't ask me to owe you anything, and then you gave me something no one else ever has. What's that? She shifted Lily gently on her shoulder. History. Over the next week, Richard visited often. He never stayed long. Sometimes he brought books, other times just stories. Once, he brought a toy wooden duck that Lily immediately dropped on the floor. She has taste, Helena teased. She has opinion, Richard corrected. It was strange, letting someone in who had been absent for so long. But healing, Helena realized, wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small ones, quiet ones, ones where you allowed someone to sit across from you and hold the past without dropping it. One evening, Helena found Alexander in his office at home, staring at an open folder. What's that? She asked, stepping inside. He closed it slowly. Our father's company. You never talk about him. He sighed. There's not much to say. The Harringtons wiped him out. He died 6 months later. Heart attack. But really, it was grief. Helena walked to him, resting her hand gently on his shoulder. Do you think he'd be proud of you? Alexander looked up. Maybe. But if I'm being honest, I don't think I really started living until the day I saw your name on that emergency contact form. Helena blinked. That wasn't exactly a declaration of love. No, he said. It was a declaration of trust, which is rarer. That night, as they cleaned up after dinner, Lily began to cry from the bedroom. Alexander moved before Helena could. I've got her, he said, disappearing down the hall. Helena leaned against the counter, arms folded, heart pounding. He returned minutes later, baby monitor in hand. She's already asleep again, he said, voice low. Helena looked at him. Not the CEO, not the rescuer, just him. The man who had held her baby before he knew her name. The man who had changed everything without demanding anything. Alexander, she said, stepping closer. I don't know what this is yet, but I know it feels like something worth staying for. He didn't speak. He just reached for her hand, brought it to his chest, and whispered, then stay. Chapter 10. The Woman Who Was Chosen. 6 months later, no one was whispering anymore. They were watching, because Helena Morgan, once a name buried at the bottom of a resume pile, now walked the corridors of Pinnacle Corporation, not as someone who was rescued, but as someone who belonged. As Director of Special Projects, she'd launched a groundbreaking internal initiative, on-site childcare, flexible work hours for parents, mental health days, mentoring programs for young women in finance. What began as a quiet proposal on Alexander's desk had become a full-scale reform. She walks like she owns the place, someone whispered in the boardroom. She walks like someone who stopped asking for permission, someone else replied. But behind the polished presentations and executive meetings was something softer, something real. Every afternoon at 12:45, Helena would stop by the rooftop lounge, just in time to catch Alexander sneaking a moment with Lily, now 8 months old and obsessed with pointing at clouds. She calls you Dada now, Helena said one day, smiling as Lily waved a soggy teething toy in his direction. I've been informed, Alexander said dryly. She also calls the toaster Dada. Small steps. She likes me best. She likes whoever gives her snacks. She's a Reed through and through. Helena looked at him. You're sure? He met her eyes. I've never been surer of anything. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her crib beneath her moon mobile, Helena stepped out onto the apartment balcony. The skyline shimmered like a promise. Alexander joined her moments later, wrapping a soft throw around her shoulders without saying a word. They stood there for a long time. Then Helena spoke. Think love meant safety. Then I thought it meant sacrifice. Now, I think it just means someone standing next to you in the quiet. Alexander looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let me be quiet with you, for a very long time. The next morning, Helena walked into the Pinnacle boardroom. The lights were dim, the blinds open, the entire executive team sat waiting. Alexander stood. I'd like to introduce the architect behind our company's most successful reform this year, he said. The reason I remember what this business is really for. The woman who taught me that power doesn't mean control, it means care. Helena stepped forward, shoulders back, voice steady. She didn't flinch when they asked hard questions. She didn't apologize for her ideas. And when one board member asked if this was personal, she smiled. "Yes," she said, "everything worth building always is." Later, in the hallway, Alexander reached for her hand. "You didn't have to say yes to that job." "I didn't." "You didn't have to stay." "I didn't." "You didn't have to love me." Helena turned to him, her eyes soft. "I didn't." Then she leaned in, without fear, without hesitation, and kissed him. Slow. Certain. Certain of the choice. Not because he was rich. Not because she was grateful. But because, in a world that had told her she was nothing, he saw her and chose her. Some stories begin in silence. Some love stories don't start with a grand gesture. They begin in silence. In the quiet moment, a girl walks out of a glass tower, not with rage, not with tears, but with her head held high after being told she wasn't enough. They begin in the space where rejection echoes. In the soft, invisible bravery of listing a stranger's name because you have no one else to call. And sometimes, those stories find their way back. Through a baby's fevered breath. Through a hospital hallway. Through a man who thought he had everything, until he realized he had no one who looked at him without expectation. Helena Morgan never imagined she would be chosen. Not by a man like Alexander Reed. Not by a room full of executives. Not by the world which once turned its face when she needed it most. But standing at the edge of her life, the one she rebuilt with her own hands, her own voice, her own worth, she realized something. Being chosen wasn't the miracle. Choosing herself first had been. And Alexander? He had spent years chasing power like it could fill the void his father's death left behind. He had built walls from glass and steel, thinking strength meant never letting anyone see you flinch. Until a baby with curious eyes looked up at him like he mattered. Until a woman he almost forgot handed him a second chance without asking for anything in return. Until he learned that love, real love, isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It stays. At Pinnacle's annual gala, the whispers returned. "She's the one from the tabloids. Isn't that the baby? Didn't she?" But Alexander only smiled, his hand firmly at the small of Helena's back. And when the speeches ended and the music started, he leaned down, pressed his lips to her temple, and whispered, "You don't have to dance, but I'd like to remember this moment with you." So they danced. Not because the world approved, but because they did. Sometimes you won't be anyone's first choice. Sometimes the door won't open. Sometimes you'll leave quietly, wondering if you were ever seen at all. But one day, someone will look at you, not with pity, not with pride, but with presence. And they'll stay, not because you need them, but because you're finally ready to be known. If you've ever walked away quietly, if you've ever trusted someone who didn't know your worth yet, if you've ever rebuilt your life from the edges, this story was for you. Share it with someone who stayed when they didn't have to, or someone who saw you even when the world didn't. Because sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the loudest kind of love.